for 1.5 feet. And when we do the conversion from what we read in the book of Genesis, we see that the ark was really, really large.
Conversions put the size of the ark at 450 feet long, 150 feet wide, and 75 feet high. But clearly, a catastrophic global flood would leave geological and anthropological imprints.
And so, for evidence for Noah's flood, what we really look for is evidence of catastrophic processes, cataclysmic processes, operating on a regional or maybe hemispherical, even global scale. And you know, the more we look, that's what we see.
One thing you might expect is billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And that's exactly what we find in the geological record. A record of lots of things suddenly buried, including very large animals buried whole.
How does the theory of a global flood fit with geological features like the Grand Canyon?
And yet we tell different stories about its history. Now, the way the evolutionist is taught to think, the way I was taught to think, the way all of us are taught to think in our education, is that present processes have done it all. And so you see this 18-mile wide canyon and this little bitty 100-foot river down there, and that river is, I suppose, doing some erosion.
At present rates, the river would take millions upon millions of years to carve out the Grand Canyon.
But the creationist might say a different idea. It says this looks for all the world like a larger volume of water came through here and carved this thing out rapidly. That would be the great flood of Noah's day.
Could this interpretation of data be supported?
By the way, even my evolutionary colleagues nowadays have recognized that the Colorado River would never carve a canyon like this. The mechanics of erosion are all wrong, that it just wouldn't carve a canyon like this. And they have come to the conclusion also that a huge volume of water racing through here not very long ago carved this canyon out rapidly. That's consistent with and supportive of the biblical doctrine of the great flood of Noah's day.
Coming up, did the original Sin City, Sodom and Gomorrah, actually exist? And are there astonishing scientific predictions in the book of Job?
Genesis depicts God as slow to anger, yet quick and decisive in judgment. Perhaps no story from the Old Testament demonstrates the intensity of God's wrath more vividly than the tragedy of Lot and his family.
The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is about sin and about punishment. It's about God deciding that he's had enough of unrighteousness and wickedness, and he's going to take action, and he's going to destroy it.
After a heated territorial dispute with his uncle Abraham, Lot decided to settle his caravan outside the gates of Sodom and Gomorrah, an area known for its desperately wicked ways. Ultimately, Lot moved into the city even as God sent messengers to declare Sodom and Gomorrah would crumble under the weight of its sin.
Lot had a pretty hard time in Sodom. Here he was among all these people who, by the accounts of the story, are pretty harsh to strangers, and he is a stranger wanting to fit in, but not really succeeding. We can learn from that story. And so when the angels come to rescue him, the rest of the town hassles them.
Lot's family fled in a mad panic.
We get this one little piece of information that Lot's wife, for some reason, decides to look back. Just maybe in regret, or maybe do I really want to leave this place? And she turns into a pillar of salt.
The most obvious explanation for the destruction of Sodom would be a seismic event, a large earthquake that unleashed a lot of material. The Bible talks about a lot of fire coming down and burning up Sodom, and the evidence at that site is that the buildings burned.
Archaeologists believe the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah, discovered southeast of the Dead Sea, sit on a fault line. Evidence suggests buildings burned from fires started on rooftops. Geologists further theorize that pressure from an earthquake could have emitted sulfur-laden bitumen, a substance present in the area. The dense smoke reported by Abraham is consistent with a fire from such material.
Sodom and Gomorrah is referenced in secondary literature all throughout the Second Temple period and into the New Testament period. It's mentioned specifically in the Genesis Apocrypha, which is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Next, we examine a story about a man who wrestles with the stubborn reality of evil in the world. Not only does his response provide readers a virtuous example, it suggests an awareness of the scientific laws that govern our universe. His name is Job.
Job was a man that lived probably 3,500 to 4,000 years ago. We don't know exactly where he lived, but we know that he was quite wealthy, herdsman and a farmer, was very much blessed by God in terms of wealth and well-being, good family, excellent reputation in the community.
At the beginning of the book of Job, the readers are introduced to a scene from the heavenly courtroom, where these figures called the sons of God, later we would think of them more as angels or as God's cabinet, so to speak, come to report to him about their activities.
One of these figures, Satan, acted as both eager prosecutor and willing executioner.
And Satan's appeal to God was, well, this man is so righteous because you've blessed him with so much physical well-being. And let me do an experiment. I'll take that all away, and I'll bet you that Job will rebel against you. And God says, you can do that, but don't take his life. And you know the story. Satan, with God's permission and consent, brings all of these physical calamities and disasters upon Job's life.
So he loses his property, he loses his family, he loses his health. He's kind of driven to the lowest level. God has abandoned me, or so it seems.
The Book of Job presents readers with a long-standing ethical quandary. Why do bad things happen to good people?
Believers in God can go through great suffering, difficulty, and trial. Their lives can have havoc ruined within it. That doesn't necessarily at all mean that they have done something wrong or that God is bringing judgment. Trial and difficulty are often God's way of pruning a person's character.
Not only does the Book of Job communicate valuable moral truths, but some scientists believe it speaks of future scientific discoveries.
The book of Job talks about the beginning of the universe and how it's a beginning beyond matter, energy, space, and time. It's the first book of the Bible that talks about the expansion of the universe. And it was Fred Hoyle, the famous British astronomer, who said that the Bible is amazing at what it says about cosmology, that the universe is traceable back to an actual beginning of matter, energy, space, and time.
How could a book written several centuries before the advent of modern science contain such mind-boggling information?
One of the dominant themes you see in the book of Job is that it talks about God creating life in optimal form with optimal designs, but not just optimal life forms, but optimal ecological relationships. In other words, he creates carnivores to relate to herbivores, so the carnivores are only able to kill off the weak, the dying, and the sick, or the unwary. Not so effective that they wipe them all out, or so ineffective they can't kill any. The ecological relationships are idealized.
Scientists count up to 10 other scientific predictions suggested in the Book of Job. They cover issues in the field of meteorology, oceanography, the study of prehistoric animals and fossil remains.
Coming up, Abraham, Joseph, and Moses. Were these men legends or proven real flesh and blood?
In Job, the reader witnesses astonishing acts of faith. Although Job suffered unjustly, he refused to curse God and instead trusted God's mysterious ways. And speaking of